Hi, my name is Liz and this is the Pink Lookbook. Today I'm going to talk about one of my most favorite designers and his iconic logo. I'm going to talk about Gianni Versace and his Medusa logo. And this logo has moved beyond fashion and is probably one of the most recognized logos in the world. And now you are going to say, I already knew this is the Medusa. I don't think I can learn anything new here. Yes, you can, because there are several reasons why I picked this topic for this video. Firstly, I came across quite a few videos online where people pointed at the Medusa calling it a lion. There is a lion within the corporate group of logos among Versace, but this is for the Versus brand, which is a sub-brand of Versace. This original logo is a Medusa, it is not a lion. I know this is the minority of people, but I just wanted to make that clear. And the Medusa also tells us a lot about the design of Gianni Versace, the sources of inspiration for his design, because the area around Reggio di Calabria, where he grew up, was heavily influenced by the Greeks. And we can see that in many designs of Gianni Versace. And the third reason is that the Medusa herself is quite an interesting figure in Greek mythology, but also later on in the arts, and she shows us a lot about women, how they were depicted in the arts, and also women and their status in society. So we have quite a few things to discuss here. Just as a side note here, this is a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. Before we dive into the details of this Medusa logo itself, it's also necessary to understand Gianni Versace's biography and also the history of the company a bit. I'm going to keep this very, very brief. We could talk hours and hours about Gianni Versace, his life, his work, but this would go beyond the scope of this video. But as I said before, Gianni Versace is one of my favorite designers, so I wouldn't mind filming another video about him. If you want me to do another video, please let me know in the comments below, and then I will film one in the future. Giovanni Maria Versace, or short Gianni Versace, was born in 1946 and he grew up in Reggio di Calabria. This is basically the tip of the Italian boot. It is also an area that was formerly colonized by the ancient Greeks, so the area was also called Magna Graecia, and until today we can see the influence in the architecture, the arts, the culture, even the landscape of the Greeks. And this is something that we need to bear in mind when we talk about not only Gianni Versace's work, but also the Medusa logo. Gianni learned the craft at his mother's sewing business before moving to Milan to become a fashion designer, but he first designed for other brands, for example Byblos, and then he presented his first collection at the Museo della Permanente, and he also did his first runway show. And after this, he opened his first boutique in the Via della Spiga in Milan in 1978. Today, the company does ready-to-wear and accessories, but also haute couture under the label Atelier Versace. And Versace himself and also his brand are probably synonymous for the late 1980s, the 1990s. His designs were bold, they were vivid, they were fun, they had a lot of color, it was very positive, and his looks and also the shapes and these patterns, these iconic patterns, are probably as famous as the fact that he basically invented the supermodels. He also socialized a lot. He was friends with people like Cher or Elton John. He even did t-shirts for Elton John's tour. And also his sister Donatella was heavily involved, because not only did she love socializing, she was also very often the marketing brains behind the company. He focused more on the creative side, and she was actually one of the major drivers to involve also the supermodels and also, for example, fly them in on private jets. This is nothing out of the ordinary that models or celebrities are invited by brands, but back then in the 1990s it was fairly new. But what this also meant is that Gianni and his sister loved to spend money. This also had consequences for the company, but this is also something that I could discuss in another video. Versace died tragically. He was murdered in front of his mansion in Miami by Andrew Cunanan in 1997, and after his death, his sister Donatella became creative director, his brother Santo was the CEO, and his niece Allegra received a 50% stake in the company, which she could then take over when she reached the age of 18. As I hinted at before, already before his death, the company had quite a few problems. They were boiling underneath the surface, and now everything came out. And what I find quite interesting is at kind of the peak of this perceived success when Jennifer Lopez wore the jungle dress in the early 2000s, the company was actually near bankruptcy. Since then, it has been a constant change in leadership and also owners. For example, in the early 2000s, Fabio Massimo Cacciatore took over as CEO but stepped down in 2003. We could say that the only constant is Donatella Versace herself. In 2014, Blackstone, an investment company, acquired 20% of Versace for 210 million euros. In 2018, Michael Kors took over the Blackstone shares and also the remaining shares of the family members. And in 2019, Versace moved into the Capri Holdings. Capri Holdings also owns the aforementioned Michael Kors and also Jimmy Choo. Now, enough of this business talk, but we kind of stay in this area of business because every business needs branding, every business needs a logo. And I would like to also briefly discuss the evolution of the Versace logo. It's necessary to understand the Medusa, but it's also quite interesting to just briefly have a look in case you're interested in buying vintage. It's good to know roughly which logo corresponds to which time period. It started in quite an interesting way because Gianni Versace founded the business in 1978, and for 2 years he didn't even have a logo. He only created it himself in 1980, and it was his name, Gianni Versace. And it's interesting also because today we associate the brand with Versace only, not with the whole name. So this also changed. And the first major iteration in the logo itself, in this word mark, was in 1990. And when I did the research for this video, I found it quite interesting to look at these logo changes with today's lens, because recently many brands have changed their logos. I was quite upset when Yves Saint Laurent butchered their traditional logo into this generic Saint Laurent. Whoever made that decision to get rid of the Cassandre logo. Cassandre, I mentioned in my other video about the artists behind the famous Hermès scarves. He designed this iconic logo. But again, this then reminded me also Versace had to change his logo. I'm not saying that the butchering of the Yves Saint Laurent logo equals the development of the Versace logo, but it reminded me that companies evolve over time, also their branding evolves and also their logos. It can be good and it can be bad. And in 1993, Gianni Versace himself came up with the Medusa logo. It is a monochrome contoured image, but there was also a version in black and gold. It also has a rounded frame with a Meander Décor, and it was used either as a standalone logo but also in combination with the name logo that I mentioned before. In 1997, the logo changed. First of all, Gianni Versace's first name was dropped from the logo, and also the Medusa's facial expression and some other details were changed a bit. And also this arch underneath the logo was changed, so they put the word mark horizontally below the Medusa. And until today, the company still uses the Medusa and the word mark. When you open their current Instagram, you can see that they use a contemporary version of the Medusa as their profile picture. And this logo is also very significant in the business sense because it shows the power of logos. Logos are more than just mere graphics. Very often founders sit down with creatives and tell them, create a logo for my business. But very often they leave the creatives without the information. What is the brand? What do we want customers to aspire to? Very often the founders themselves don't even know that yet because they need to create it. And the Versace logo has all of this. Even if we look at the logo, not knowing what the company is about, there's something about this Medusa that leaves us wanting more. We want to know who is behind the brand? What are the products? Is this a community that I can also be part of? And this is something quite difficult to achieve because already with his logo, he created kind of a myth. And I think we can learn a lot from Gianni Versace. And I think this would be something interesting that could be taught at business school. Let's come to our main protagonist, Medusa. There are many theories why Versace picked this Greek mythological figure. I also found quite a few quotes by Gianni Versace online, but I could not 100% confirm them. But I want to share one here which is quite interesting because according to this comment, he said he picked the Medusa because she had the ability to make people fall in love with her desperately fall in love with her, and they had no chance of ever coming back. While this quote is a bit more speculative, we have one confirmed source of inspiration, and this is where Gianni Versace grew up. The area around Reggio Calabria used to be Greater Greece. It was colonized by the Greeks, and until today we can see elements of architecture and art in the region. And even Gianni himself said he played in the ruins with his siblings in these ancient ruins, and this is where he came across the Medusa. We don't know if he really came across the Medusa or if this is a myth that he created because the story just sounds really good. But nevertheless, it is a fact that he was surrounded by this Greek culture, by the Greek elements, and this is definitely something that inspired him. And another source of inspiration could be the flag of neighboring Sicily, because this flag has the Medusa at its center. We don't know if it was really the source of inspiration, but it looks very similar to the logo that Versace then created, the Medusa that he created. So I'm sure he knew about that Medusa. We just can't say if he really was inspired by the flag. Now, who is this Medusa? You probably now think about this woman with snakes on her head, but the early depictions in ancient Greece were actually very different. She was known as one of the Gorgons. The Gorgons were 3 sisters who had the ability to turn people into stone simply by looking at them. And Medusa was the mortal one of the 3, and she was actually killed by Perseus, who beheaded her, and then he used her head as a weapon against his enemy to turn them into stone. He later gave the head to Athena, who then put her on a shield. And this Medusa was not depicted in this beautiful or alluring way we probably know today. She was actually depicted in a more monstrous form, and it only started in the 5th century BC that she was depicted in a more beautiful way. And I found quite an interesting depiction on a jar from the 5th century BC by the artist Polygnotos. This jar is now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it is interesting because it's a version of the story where Perseus is told by King Polydectes to kill Medusa. And he does this and is accompanied by Athena, Hermes and the nymphs. And this depiction is interesting because it's one of the earliest surviving depictions of Medusa in a more beautiful way. It's not this monstrous way. And this depiction is very interesting for another reason, because it's actually a bit funny. Perseus turns away from Medusa while he is about to kill her. He looks at Athena. So on the one hand, maybe Polygnotos wanted to make us feel sorry for Medusa, she's about to be killed, but it could also be this funny aspect that he actually wanted to mock Perseus. And now you will say, how could Perseus actually kill Medusa? Because before I mentioned everybody who looked at Medusa was turned to stone. Perseus actually used a trick. He used a mirrored shield, and he only looked at her reflection, so he was not turned into stone and he could kill her. And over time, this Medusa becomes more alluring, more beautiful. This is also due to the Roman poet Ovid. He told her story in one of the versions of his Metamorphoses, and that the god Neptune, in Greek he is Poseidon, pursued Medusa in Minerva's temple. Minerva is the Roman equivalent of the Greek Athena, and Minerva gets very angry and she punishes Medusa. She turns Medusa's hair into snakes, and it's quite interesting, a woman punishing another woman, but the man doesn't have to take over any responsibility whatsoever. So we have these different versions of the Medusa story, which is quite tragic, but Medusa also stands for the depiction of women in the arts, especially in the ancient Greek and Roman arts, because women and goddesses represented dualities. They were creators but also destroyers. They were mothers and virgins. They stood for life and they stood for death. And also the serpent, the snakes, is not a coincidence, because the serpent stands for the dark side, the underworld, but also for eternity and also for ancient knowledge. And even in Christianity, there is this obvious link of the evil serpent and the woman, because don't forget, it was Eve, the woman, who was lured out of paradise by the evil snake. It was not the man. It was because of a woman that humanity became mortal. So here again, there's the link between the evil snake and the woman. And I would like to briefly come back to the Versace logo and point out another very Greek element of the whole logo, and this is the frame, this Meander Décor, the round decor around the Medusa. And meander is a motif which is made from one continuous line and it is being repeated. The term meander on the one hand links to rivers because rivers meander when they have the sequence of loops, so similar to this pattern, but the term also goes back to the Greek meandros, which relates to the Turkish Menderes River. And today we call this pattern Greek lines very often, but these Greek lines were not only popular in Greece, they were also used in Rome, for example, but also in cultures very far away from Greece, thousands of kilometers away from Greece, so it's not necessarily a pattern that was only used in ancient Greece. Now we have covered ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but Medusa throughout art history was or is a very popular figure, and we see her throughout art history. For example, there's a mosaic depicting Alexander the Great at the Battle of Issus, where he has a depiction of Medusa on his chest. And later on in the Renaissance and in the Baroque, we see this evolution of Medusa towards more beauty, towards more allure. And there's still the horror around Medusa. People should be scared of Medusa. And I would like to show you two very famous Medusas. One is by Benvenuto Cellini from the 16th century. It is this bronze sculpture. And we see the drama when Perseus beheaded Medusa. He holds her head and shows us the horror. He killed this creature. And the second one, which you probably have seen, is by Caravaggio. If you have not seen it in the museum, you have seen it online in movies, in pop culture. It is so famous. And for me, this is probably one of the most famous Medusa depictions because the horror that Caravaggio created is just very unique. You will not forget this Medusa. And until today, the Medusa could also be interpreted as the human psyche because on the one hand, we have the appreciation of beauty, at the same time we have the animalistic instincts. And even today, when people are being asked to describe a scary woman, they very often actually say she would look like Medusa. And I find it interesting that her beauty actually created her tragedy. She had to die because she was beautiful. And this is also something that the feminist movement picked up on and even the #MeToo movement used. And Versace's interpretation took all of these elements up. On the one hand, he started with the Greek mythology, with the ancient Greek arts, but then he created a very contemporary logo. Even today, many years later, this logo looks very contemporary. At the same time, he plays with all the aspects, the beauty, the horror, the tragedy, the strength of a woman. And some people even say that this logo also represents his work and his collections because his garments used to be borderline ugly and sexy at the same time. And we have also reached the end of my video, and I'm pretty sure you already knew about the Medusa by Versace before, but did you know about all of these background facts, or do you have a version of the Medusa story you would like to share? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and if you could subscribe to my channel. If you want more fashion related articles, you can head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com. And if you like, you can also check out my fashion label, Pelagona. And if you like exploring this link between fashion and art history, I have another video about Gucci, about their Flora scarf, which looks very simple, but actually has very close links to 2 Botticelli paintings. So you can check that out too. Thank you very much for watching this video and see you in the next one.